I'll take the roll. I'll begin with myself, and I'm here. Renee Westelusk.
Here.
West Katzenstein.
Here.
I heard you, thank you. Lyle Fisher.
I'm here.
Judy Decker. Camille Anderson, she will be absent. She notified me that she will not be attending today. Tim Carroll.
Here.
And Regina Truglin is on the freeway between here and Needles. She's going to be late, she notified me, or likely late, so we'll see. She's not here now, but we do, those are the voting members. We have a quorum. Non-voting members, Don Zadiba.
Present.
Tom Bukowskis informed me he would not be here tonight.
Somebody just turned it on.
John Kersey.
Present.
Thank you, John. And Lorelei Oviatt. She's not online, so she's absent. And I see Carol Thomas Kiefer, the GM, General Manager for the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority, is on the line. So good evening, Carol. With that, we'll have open.
Good evening.
Thank you, Carol. With that, we'll have open public comment for subjects not on the agenda this evening. And we have one?
Yeah, your popular public is here. Ron Kaczynski.
Overwhelmingly.
Yes. The reason I want to speak, and I toyed with this, I wasn't sure I wanted to do, but after attending last GA meeting, I was sort of disappointed in the way that this committee does a lot of work. And some of the reports you've put together, in particular the one on community involvement just recently, and then I see things like this go to the GA, and it's like crickets, or let's accept and file. You do a lot of work. You make a lot of good recommendations, and the GA board, the majority of them, obviously there's one that doesn't, looks at this stuff and says, "Well, thank you, and let's file it away," with the promise that maybe we'll have some money later, maybe we won't. And then you get a suggestion that let's look at least 2 items. Let's discuss 2 items. The change in the time of the meeting, and maybe extending the time for presentations or for public comment to 5 minutes. And nothing but crickets from that board. Not anybody would say, at least let's discuss it for the good of the public. Let's be more transparent to the public. So the point is, I look at you guys, I know the hard work that you're doing, and I can't help but feel like you're being treated like, well, you're just a box that we tick off. And that's it, because all the work that you guys do, and I was actually proud of the work you did on a community involvement plan. I thought, man, this is the way to go. This is some good stuff in here. And here, Jay's spending millions of dollars on legal fees, and they can't, kick out some money to do some of the simple things that you guys recommend. And we talk about getting more community here, and until we start looking at the things that you're talking about, it ain't gonna happen. And so I just feel like you're working so hard, and you get nothing. I try to think way back since the group was formed. How many recommendations or what have you brought forward that truly resulted in some action from that board rather than thank you for your information? And I think you deserve to be recognized for that. And I think that the board deserves and this community deserves to start implementing some of the things that you recommend. I really do. I would also like to thank Don. If you know, this is going to be his last meeting. I think he's done a great job here. And I'd like to thank him. And I'd also ask if the chair would allow, that I'm allowed to make a comment when you start your agenda item at the beginning. It's going to be a short comment. It isn't about the content of that, but it's about the general mitigation that you're recommending, if you don't mind.
Talking about the agenda item later?
Yeah.
You want to speak before public comment?
Yes, if you just give me an opportunity to do public comment at the front, because I'm probably the only one here, and then I just have a short, because I don't want to have to go through what you're recommending, because I know about it, I agree with a lot of it, I don't have a problem with that.
You know about it, but many of us didn't until an hour ago.
I just read it. But I haven't read it yet. But I've been involved in sitting here with it, so my comments aren't going to be in the meat of what's going on. It's more about generally what's going on with it. And I don't mind. I'll sit through it. If depending if you guys are gonna be pretty quick about it, I don't have a problem. But otherwise, if you don't mind, I'll leave it entirely up to you. If I can make a quick comment at
I'll
the
try
beginning.
to remember that.
Thank you.
Is there any public comment from the internet?
David,
I'm sorry.
I'm going to speak as a member of the public, although
You can do so from the dais if you
Well, I thought
delineate your speaking
it's-
that way.
It's because I'm not speaking for the group. You guys are working real hard, and I consider myself an idea man. Come up with ideas. They may not always work, but it's worth considering. I'd like to put a lot of the stormwater, like we just had, into a saltwater area in the valley, dilute that water, and make it recoverable if the Navy and the valley wants to develop a desalination technology that's appropriate for this valley. And I'm not just thinking about our valley. I'm thinking about California can't just decide that, well, the water table of the valley is going down, in the Central Valley is going down, and, well, I guess we can't have agriculture in California. No, we need to have methods of getting more water. And as I mentioned one time at a meeting that we used to live in Santa Barbara, or in Goleta. We lived on a hill, and we had a well that had salt water from saltwater intrusion. And we desalinated it, and it was a supply for our family and 2 other families. So desalination is something the Navy has done and is probably a world expert. Anyway, so I'd like the Navy and the Valley to be interested in developing a resource that utilizes a major runoff like we just had, put it into a place in the playa where there's salt water, but maybe not that salty, and dilute it, and then it can be processed more cheaply. And there's a story about in Santa Barbara years ago, they built a desalination plant, and then it rained and it filled Lake Cachuma, and so they decided they didn't need to. They never used the desalination plant, so they sold off its parts. Well, in recent years, they've built another desalination plant, and they're going to go ahead and keep it this time. But what happens is we don't have a Lake Cachuma. We have a groundwater basin with gradations of salinity. And if we can find an area that it makes sense to capture a large amount of the rainwater, not just a small amount, we can have a pot of water that we can go to be another potential major source. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So we have no one from online. Okay. With that, we'll move to agenda item number 3, the minutes, approval of minutes for April and June. We'll take the April one first. You all should have seen those. So discussion or a motion on the April 27th, or April 27th minutes.
One spelling correction on page 1.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's the second to the last sentence. Ron Kosinski's last name is misspelled. It says Y, and it should be I on the end.
Thank you for catching that. And I did spell correct on that, but apparently it didn't catch.
It came out correct on the second page.
Yeah, so
Okay.
wonder why it didn't work on the whole document.
Okay.
Thank you, Renee. So was there a motion attached with that, Renee?
Yeah,
You moved to accept it with that change.
correct.
Do we have a second?
I would second that.
Okay, Renee and Lyle. Any discussion?
This is Wes Katstein. I'd just like to thank David for the effort he puts in. I feel my comments are always captured, and I believe everyone else's are. So,
Thank you, Wes. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions or recusals? Okay, that passed unanimously. Okay, the next one is the June minutes, June 22nd minutes. Any discussion or motion?
One minor spelling thing on the last sentence of the first page. It says, I think it should be full PAC report.
Thank you, Renee.
Okay.
You're going to get the Solomon Rajaratnam Award for correcting the documents. That's a compliment.
Okay.
So was that a motion attached to
Yes,
that?
yes, with that correction.
And I would second that one, too.
Okay, so Renee and Lyle again. Any discussion? All in favor of accepting it with the one correction?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions or recusals? Okay, that passed unanimously. Agenda item number 5, PAC recommendations for board consideration regarding the shallow well mitigation program. Review the ad hoc subcommittee recommendation regarding fair and reasonable expectations for documentation on the demonstration of well maintenance under the shallow well mitigation program and develop full PAC recommendations. And this is a repeat from last time where we reviewed in depth for a couple hours the original report, and we asked the subcommittee, as we almost always do, we asked the subcommittee to go back and take the inputs into account and do 2 specific things to it. And we, due to some miscommunications and some people that are on vacation, we did not get it distributed in time for full review before this meeting. But before we get to that level of detail, Mr. Kaczynski wanted to make a comment.
First of all, to remind you that myself, Ron Kaczynski, this is my own personal opinion. This has nothing to do with the Indian Wells Water District. I want to make that clear. And this goes along with what I was saying on the previous part, where I feel that this committee is sort of being, almost maybe disrespected isn't a word, and the community is being sort of slapped in the face. But this one has to do with the small well owners. And what I want to say is that when I watched the last GA meeting, and I believe that it was brought forward that one recommendation that was sort of floating around was about some kind of a matrix chart that the well owners could look at and check off that they have everything they need. And that was almost immediately shut down by county council. Being, hey, we don't need that stuff because we have a policy, we have a procedure, and if we start trying to change that, then there was some legal something going on there about not treating everybody fair. So again, you guys are working hard. I commend this group, Judy, Lyle, West, and Don. This is a lot of work and a lot of good stuff in here. But I also feel that unless somehow you guys make it clear that we're doing this for a reason and it should be looked at and take it to heart and not be shut down immediately for something that no one's asking why. Why is it not legal to change procedures? Why is it not legal to look at other things? So I just recommend as you proceed with all this effort you're putting in, which I think is valuable, that you somehow get across that some action needs to be taken. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Okay, with that, did everybody get a chance to look at this before the meeting? I know it wasn't forwarded out until about an hour or 2 hours before the meeting.
No, it was not forwarded out, and they got their copy now. And before we go any further, this is Judy Decker, the chairman of the subcommittee. There is nothing in here that was not in the document that you received last month that we talked about extensively. You asked for us to summarize it, and that's what we did. If you would like to review it now, or you want me to read it to you, I have such a dramatic voice you'll all fall asleep, but go ahead. This is a committee, it's not a board, so you can proceed however you choose. I apologize. It was sent to April, and April sent a message that it was forwarded, and I thought that meant it was forwarded to all the committee members. So I sincerely apologize for that. It was not my intention whatsoever to hand you a cold piece of paper tonight.
Appreciate that thought, Judy. I don't think anybody thought that was the intent. As I said, we had some miscommunication, some folks that are not working this week.
Right.
And it takes 2 or 3 to tango, and I'm involved in this too. So we didn't get it out there in time for full review. But we had asked you last time to add a bulletized list of recommendations regarding the policy and reporting form.
And you can see that it's bulletized.
Including the subcommittee recommended definitions. And number 2 was to consider and provide any public communication and engagement opportunities that that your recommendations may suggest. So that was the additional tasking we took you back for. And I did not get this until right at the meeting, so I have not had a chance to look at it yet. But we'll accept, and
While you read, I'll talk.
Well, how about, I was going to ask if you had said you were asking us if we wanted you to go over it in your dulcet tones. As everybody, or would we like to hear Judy summarize it?
Look at how much they want to hear me summarize it.
I'm hearing crickets, to quote a member of the public. Judy, if you want to summarize it, go ahead.
Well, the real summary is, I guess there's one slight change. Again, Ron has already mentioned it. That's legal counsel of the GA. This document is a document that lays out the problems for a de minimis well owner. And a de minimis well owner is, I think, the only type of well that is defined by sigma. It is a small well that produces 2 acre-feet of water or less annually. And it is usually used by a single person, but in this valley there are many small co-ops which will have 4 or less connections. That too can be categorized as a de minimis well if each of those connections uses 2 acre-feet or less. The subcommittee chose deliberately not to address shallow wells. West reminded us that the mitigation plan mentions domestic wells, shallow wells as being domestic wells, mutuals, co-ops, and small agricultural wells. We chose to only address de minimis because the other wells, and I'm paraphrasing what I have here, the other wells can have complications. They can have legal documents associated with them. They can have much larger wells than a de minimis well, depending on their use. And we feel that a policy for those kinds of wells needs to be developed. It's not in this document. And there is absolutely no intention of any kind of discrimination. It's just a separate issue. 95%. Right. Over 95% of the wells in this valley are de minimis wells. And so when you write a document that spells out the details and the need, not necessarily the needs, but the details of how a de minimis well can fail, you've covered most of the wells in this valley by far. I'm going to put my glasses on. The document goes into details as to how a well can fail. What happens usually, and we talked about this last time, is the pump or the motor or both will fail. And so you pull the well. And at that time would be a good time, and you don't do it, you hire a well driller to do it. And the well driller will tell you, your pump failed or your motor burned out. And you order a new one and you put it in. That's the maintenance of a de minimis well. De minimis wells aren't pulled all the time or on a regular schedule like a municipal well would be. I don't know about mutual wells. You know, a mutual system could be a system where they had one really large well. It could be a system where they had several small wells that would give them redundancy. The mutual system, most of the problems that have occurred with mutual systems that I've been aware of is it hasn't really been the well, it's been the system itself. It's either old and decrepit and it needs to be replaced, or the people who have been taking care of it for the last 40 years are sick and old and no longer capable of taking care of it and want somebody else to do it. It's that kind of thing. So that kind of thing is not part of, I don't think it's part of what PAC should do, and the subcommittee decided it was not something that we should do. And I'd like to point out that the well mitigation plan mentions agricultural wells, small agricultural wells, but it gives no definition of what small agriculture is. Is small agriculture 5 acres? Or is it 1,000 acres? What is it? That is a relative thing. And I think when the GA staff goes over some of these issues they have written, they need to readdress some of them. But I don't think it's up to the PAC to do that, because you're going to get into legal issues. It talks about typical shallow well casing design. The well casing is usually mild steel. It's usually 6 or sometimes 8 inches if it's going to be a shared well. The typical well has two 20-foot sections of screen down at the bottom of the casing. So I'm not going to go into the details of some of the wells here have more because of the previous well driller. That was how he did his wells. What happens? The issue here, and we had a long discussion about this. The issue that we are addressing is a de minimis well failure because of declining water levels, and in some cases accompanying that will be an increase in TDS. And TDS stands for total dissolved solids. And that's the minerals that are in the water. Now, how it works is as the water level declines, the pump and the motor are lowered to stay in the water. If they're lowered to a point where the intake for the pump is opposite this perforated casing, the screen where the water comes in, it will pull in the surrounding material that's outside of the casing. It will pull in sands and larger materials, clays, whatever happens to be there. And it's doing that will cause well failure, because it will clog up the screen, it will clog up the intake on the pump, and you'll have a real problem. let's see. We did summarize failure from total dissolved solids. In some areas of the valley, chemistry is not my strong point. There's iron manganese in the water, in the soil, and that can come in and coat the casing, in particular the screen part of the casing, and clog it up. It can erode the metal casing. What's the other one, Don? West? Here it is, down at the bottom of the page. Oh yeah, it's high chloride and sulfate can do a similar thing, and both of these chemical combinations can actually erode the casing to the point of collapse. So we go on and on about, we put in, summarized the details of what can cause a de minimis well failure. We say that it's up to the well owner to maintain, or if we don't say get it if you don't have it. It's up to him to have the paperwork that goes with his well. It's just like other expensive vital things you buy. You keep the paperwork that goes with it. And as far as maintenance goes, the only maintenance a de minimis well needs is to have the pump and motor, when it fails, to have it pulled. Right, and replaced. We do say that as far as the water chemistry goes, it can be an issue, as I already said, in some places, and we suggest that a video camera be used to thoroughly investigate that issue. If desired, it will certainly, we didn't say it was mandatory because in some cases it won't be mandatory. It won't be, not mandatory, it won't be necessary. And we say that not all the cost of the well repair would be borne by the GA, that some of it will be the responsibility of the well owner, and that we offer the same evaluation process that we offered last time, that is a matrix. We didn't change the matrix. It's like it was in the report last month. And then the final thing that we put in here is that we hope that the GA staff looks at this report and uses it when they upgrade their 2025 report that is coming up in a little over a year. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Good. Thank you, Judy.
Did I miss anything?
Member comment?
Boy, I put them all to sleep.
Well, I think it's a good idea to have that matrix at the bottom of the second page, that percentage, like how much they weigh each factor in evaluating the well. I think that's a good thing to have in our recommendations, so that the GA or Stetson Engineering understands how to evaluate the shallow wells better.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to start on the end so we get everybody's comments in here. Tim? No comment? Don?
I think this is excellent work. I guess the question in my mind is how does this get folded into the existing policy? Because there is a policy. This goes into a lot of detail to define some of the criteria. I guess that's what I'm kind of struggling with is how does this get incorporated into that policy?
Well, that would be up to them, but I think it could be an addendum. This really came about, in my mind anyway, as we listened for several meetings to the discussion about the Heritage well and the Stark Street well. And a lot of time was spent by Stetson on those two well failures. And that means a lot of money. And the thought was if something could be provided that would be a better guideline that could be looked at, it would cost less to the GA. It would provide closure one way or the other to the well owner who had applied. People, sometimes even well owners, I think, they take water for granted. You turn on the tap and it's always going to be there. And that's not the case. And that's especially not the case when you're a domestic well owner. Now, West over here, where he lives, he can run a hose over to his neighbors. Where we live and where Lyle lives, we're going to have an awful lot of hose.
A lot of long hose.
And we are not isolated in that regard, I might add. So that's how this came about, was how about some guidelines? You know, you as manager of the water district, you have guidelines, or you, if you have a problem, you call Krieger and Stewart, and they certainly have guidelines on how to how to deal with your well problems. Because, of course, when one of your wells fails, it's a major concern because of all the customers you serve. So it's our little problem magnified 100-fold. And I think, you know, Steve Johnson has said several times about, well, in 2025, we have to really look at the GSP again. I think that would be a good place to look at it and to fold this in to their well mitigation plan. And if staff would like to write a more detailed guideline for mutuals or small agricultural wells that may fail, that would be a place to put that also.
Yeah, I wasn't questioning the value of it. I think it's very valuable. I'm just wondering how, because it's called a policy. I guess it's more of a procedure that outlines how somebody that believes they have a valid claim to on their well. And I don't remember the details, but something about I think there's a form you have to fill out, and then there's a procedure for who reviews it and how it goes. So this would be helpful, I guess, in the review process. But again, I don't know that this would be folded into the, I'll call it procedure of how you apply and how it goes through the approval process. But it's more supplemental information for people that are making that decision, I guess, is how I see it.
Well, I see this as also a guideline for the well owner.
Yes, it is.
You know, oh gee, I don't have any water coming out of the tap this morning. What happened? Many well owners, I find it sort of incredible, but it's true. they know they have a well, but they really don't know how it works. And this will be a guideline for them as well. You know, do they have a pump and motor failure? Well, you know, if you go out to the box in your pump house or wherever you have the switch for your well and you turn it on, turn it off, and turn it on and you don't hear anything, most likely your pump and your motor's frozen up and your pump, it doesn't work. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Don and Wes and Lyle, but I think when you pull your pump and motor, most likely you're going to replace both of them because it's expensive to pull your pump and motor and then put it back in the ground again.
It costs too much to have it pulled to not do it. Okay,
Kind of what I'm
might
hearing.
as well.
Kind of what I'm hearing, is we've talked about fact sheets before. Would this be considered as a fact sheet perhaps available to the public?
This-
And to the Groundwater Authority for their guidelines and approval process?
My understanding was a fact sheet was supposed to be a one-page item, and we tried really hard to reduce this to one page, but felt that what is on it is really necessary, and thus it's 2 pages. I think, well, for myself, I think it should be folded into the well mitigation plan as an addendum, as I said. But I guess it would be up to the board and staff to decide what they're going to do with it.
Don? Yeah, make sure your mic's on.
Push the button down.
Same button.
In the center? The center?
There's a,
There you go. Light.
one thing to keep in mind is the thing that triggered this effort was a substantial amount of criticism from the, I'll say the public. It was the well owners that were providing most of the criticism that they had not been given enough guidance to what had happened. And so if you look at that guidance, it is truly weak. And it puts the burden almost entirely on Stetson to determine whether a well has failed, even to the point of deciding, what things are failures. Just because the well doesn't produce water doesn't mean the well has failed. It may just be a burned out motor, but that's not spelled out at all. It's just a short paragraph that describes well failure in general. So that's what triggered this whole thing in the first place. Where it goes is up to the board.
Let me try to get some closure on this. I shared the same question you did, and we got really close during our last meeting when we focused on what the original question. I mean, this is a lot of really good information. It represents a lot of hard work, and it's really hard when you try to condense things down even more. Those that write a lot know it's easy to write a lot. It's very hard to get to condense thoughts and be them clear and have them clear. What we lost perhaps in this, and I think this should go largely without modification, but what was missing in my mind from the was covered in some pieces of the last one, but not covered in this one, was the essence of the original question, to clarify to a well owner, what kind of documentation should you be expected to have? And we were asked what's reasonable, because we can say, you got to have every maintenance report ever or whatnot, but that's not what's reasonable. And we boiled it down, in my recollection, to 3 potential areas. I think we said you'd want and let me complete this, you'd want the original well drillers report if available. And we had a mistaken impression that they were always available and on file from the county, but that's not necessarily true for those before 1981, 82, 80, some time frame in there. They weren't required before that. And sometimes a well may have been owned by 5 people subsequent to that time. So it would not be reasonable to perhaps expect that information, but that may be a case where a simple video examination could give them the same information. So that might be one of the requirements, an original well driller's report or a video to establish the original depth and where the perforations were, and all those things that you talk about in here. The second item that was in here before was any relevant maintenance that you may have. And the third item, which was the most critical, was the current well evaluation report. And that was the one, and that was kind of what I expected to see on the end item recommendations. Was we've gone through all this and we really think that perhaps it can be condensed for clarity to a well owner what these are the three areas that you might be expected to provide documentation for. And I'll throw that discussion open to folks.
Let me just give me a second here. I've been wanting to, what this describes here is the construction of a domestic well for the domestic well owner. And our problem here in addressing this problem for you is trying to get across in an uncomplicated, which this is complicated, I totally agree. I think I said that. But it has to be, to define the stuff that has to be defined so people that don't know anything about wells can understand what it is we're trying to say. And that seems to be what I'm hearing here right now, is that people don't understand. My problem is I've been intimately familiar with my well for more than 40 years now. Yes, you know, I understand. I don't understand everything, but I sure do. I've sure had a lot of experience messing with it, you know, including deeping it because of the exact failure we're talking about here, due to the same reason. And I just calculated that too. My extra 20 feet of perforations, 13 1/3 years is what it took off the life of my well. It shortened its life by 13 1/3
Are you
years.
disagreeing with what I suggested we might add for completeness? Those three areas?
I don't. I guess I got to go back and start all over again on what we were supposed to do, and I don't think I understand. I must not understand what it is that we originally were supposed to do. I'm getting, yeah.
I agree with you.
So I don't, what this describes is, let me just run that through again. What this describes is the construction of a domestic well and how a domestic well fails so it can get mediation from the GA. That's what it describes.
And we were asked, that's all, and it's really good information. We were asked, and so therefore, what's fair for the Groundwater Authority to expect from a well owner to provide any documentation? To answer Judy's question about we can't put all the onus, or the GA can't put all the onus and expense on Stetson and the Groundwater Authority, what would we expect?
You don't want them to.
Yeah, and those three areas were the things that I extracted.
If there had been some definitions, like here, in the original stuff, Stetson wouldn't have spent, well, I'd have no idea how long they spent, on that heritage well, because it did not count. It was not, it's eliminated from this. It's not covered. It should not have been. No one should have even looked at it, because it's not covered. Now the Stark one, okay, it's still not. That's a bigger one. We're talking de minimis, 4 people or less, single family, or 4 people or less, and that's what this address. Because all the rest of them, they get bigger. State laws come in, and there's all kinds of water qualities and all kinds of stuff that we're not addressing that I don't have to worry about. Is it complicated? Yes, it is, and it's too complicated. However, it has to be.
We're covering over 90% of the wells with this document.
That's correct.
And we say that the well owner needs to take the responsibility of the documentation. Who knows what the well owner has? Mm-hmm. He may have all of it. He may have I would certainly hope that someone wouldn't spend the money and buy a place in the country and have nothing written about his well. But that, of course, is a possibility.
That happens, and
Then
it's scary.
That is still his responsibility.
That's correct.
Yeah, I'd like to throw a couple comments in here if I could.
Yeah.
I think what we've put together here forms the perfect foundation to answer the question that you just asked, David, that we didn't really truly answer. But we couldn't answer it without putting together this kind of a foundational understanding of how a well is constructed and what its failure modes are. And so I put a little bit of thought into, I was, in the back of my mind, I was thinking about, okay, we had these questions we're supposed to answer, and I think we have the foundation how we could address those questions, at least for shallow, de minimis wells. I have some thoughts on what you might require of the well owner, but that might be getting on to the next task instead of doing it here in front of everybody. But my first thought was, that what does the GA need from the well owner? They need to know that the well failed because of groundwater dropping or groundwater quality diminishing. They need to know that. They need to know that the well was functional when the GSP was signed. They probably don't need the original well driller's report. That's highly desirable for the well owner to keep. There are an awful lot of, they may not need to know the well maintenance history. They need to know the well was functioning when the GSP was signed. They need to know that the design at that point in time was right. It didn't have too big of a pump. The pump wasn't placed inappropriately. And then the well owner, or perhaps the well owner plus the GA has to decide, does the well failure itself qualify? And that's where videoing would help and things like that. And so I think that there are a lot of desirable things for the well owner to have in terms of records that a smart well owner would have. But I think as far as the GA is concerned, there might be a much more limited amount of documentation. And I realize I'm getting on to the next phase here of this topic, but let me dummy up. I can see lots of folks here
exactly
wanting to talk.
I'd
what
like
this suggests.
to say something about that. I can't remember all you said, Wes, but you brought up many things that in fact might be impossible for the well owner. If you had a situation where the piece of property had many owners, he might not be able to answer that question. I think a better approach would be to leave it as it is, and he would turn in to Stetson, if that's, who's going to process it, what he had, and let Stetson tell him what he needs, rather than us making a huge list of requirements that may or may not be necessary. I'll go back again to 99.9% of the people whose wells fail call up Garrison or whoever they can get to come pull their well. And Garrison will come out and he'll pull their well and he'll say, oh, gee, your motor's burned out. And he'll take apart the pump and he'll say, your impellers are all eroded. And he'll say, I think you need to do X, Y, and Z. That's how it works. Am I right, Don?
Yeah.
And the well owners are knowledgeable because that's what they do every day, is they pull and install or drill wells.
The well drillers are knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Yes, they're extremely knowledgeable. And so I think for this policy committee, and it's a policy committee, not a technical committee, for us to make a list of things that are required, I think that's stepping over the line a bit, and I think it's also, unnecessary. And I would like to see us take it a step at a time, because that seems to be a somewhat better way of getting things done, is present this to the GA and see what they do with it. If they want us to do that, then they need to state that. I have a feeling there are going to be some quite negative comments on it from some of the GA staff members.
So what I tried to say is
Like
this is a
last
good
month.
foundation for the next step that we might be asked to do. So I think that's what we're both
Yes.
saying. Secondly, from a policy point of view, I think it might be a very simple statement. We need to know that the well was functioning when the GSP was signed, and we need to determine whether or not the failure was something the GA is responsible for. And I think that's probably where the responsibilities end.
Wouldn't an easier question to be to say, when did the well fail?
Sure, that works for me.
I mean, that's what we were tasked to do.
Yeah.
And so if it comes down to, is it simple as give us the current well evaluation report and anything else you may have, that's our recommendation. And we have all this that we can give to them, and it's good and is valuable. But that's what they asked us to do is what, and it's right along with everything we're saying here, is what's reasonable for a well owner. And the only one I haven't heard a comment from is John. What's your input?
Well, there's a lot of information regarding the condition of the well itself, but you're calling out water quality, but you're not stipulating in any way what qualifies as a decline in water quality. Because you're saying it's 75% of the judgment, but what's that? Is it went from 500 to 550 parts per billion? Or did it fall to a point that it no longer qualifies as potable water under state and federal guidelines?
That's correct.
That's what you need to stipulate right there.
I think we ran out of room.
Yeah, John, I think you're right. There is no quantitative qualification for what is stated. Thank you for that. I might make a comment on the subject that we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes or so. I didn't realize that we were going to try to create forms for the GA. I thought we were doing policy. And when we start coming up with lists of things that they need to have, and checklists and stuff, we're talking about how they would apply for a well remediation. We're supplying the essence of what the well failure consists of in clear terms, which has not been made before. And all the rest of this stuff is important, but is not part of policy. It's the nuts and bolts of actually creating forms and applications.
Right. I thought we were to summarize what we presented to you last month.
And the bottom line was that was leading to what's our recommendation for what documentation a well owner may be asked to provide. And it's pretty general. I agree with West that would answer the mail. I mean, this is needed. And I think the committee should go forward as a whole with it. That's my opinion as one member. We'll see where we lie. But I would like to see us, to the best of our abilities, try to close on an answer for what would be reasonable for them to apply. You know, to expect from a well owner to provide. And I would think at the minimum it's a current well evaluation report that says they've lost it. And there may be others in there. I listed the three things that I thought we had pretty much general agreement on without the specifics involved in them from the last meeting. And that would both provide all the detail badly needed that's in this report, which would be a part of our report, the greater PAC report, as well as the one or two items that we think is reasonable for a shallow well owner, to a de minimis well owner to provide. West, is that what you were?
Yeah, I think from a and we were asked, we're being asked policy questions, so I think we could phrase it rather generally as a policy statement. And when I ask myself, what does a GA need to know to mitigate a well? First of all, they need to know that they have a responsibility for that well. And that meant that well, one way or another, can be proven to have been functioning when the GA took responsibility. And that would have been when the GSP was signed. So I would think the GA needs to know that the well qualifies because it was functioning. The GA needs to know that it qualifies because it was built to good standards. It was not, the pump wasn't too large initially, or the well wasn't deep enough. And that can be determined when the well is examined when it fails. And the GA needs to know, it needs to be determined whether the well failure qualifies or not for remediation. So those are policy statements. And I think, in my mind, that's the starting point, and maybe that's as far as we go. I see Judy shaking her head no.
I don't think they're policy statements. I think having well evaluation form is okay, and I see a place to put it. In the matrix, it says, groundwater, the second one, it says well condition and well history. And you could put a comma and add well evaluation reports. You like that idea?
Current one? Well,
A current one or current and past?
I suggested just adding at the end the answers to the question we were asked. But that's because I think it's important that we say that. And there's a whole second part of this discussion we'll raise in just a minute. But we need to resolve this.
Can I add something from my perspective?
Yes, Renee.
Okay. I did my own homework, and I've gone on the internet, and there is wellowner.org and the National Groundwater Association that recommends having an annual inspection by a licensed or certified water well system professional if you're a residential shallow well owner. And in the inspection, it talks about flow test determination, pump motor performance, pressure tank and pressure switch contact, evaluation, equipment evaluation for sanitary needs, and annual tests of the water for bacteria, nitrates, iron, manganese, water hardness, sulfides, water appearance and odor. And they say it should be a concise, clear written report. To me, I don't know how much this would cost, but whatever we require the shallow well owner to do, it should be cost effective. Because if you go back to the shallow well mitigation report under their part where it talks about please provide information on any and all maintenance, repair, and improvement to your well since original construction and operation and who performed the work. They talk about all kinds of stuff in here like well casing, refurbishing, cleaning, scraping. All that costs like $20,000 or $30,000 if you have to have all that done on your well. And most shallow well owners aren't going to have that kind of money laying around. So my thing is an annual inspection probably would be cost effective and would yield the show over time if there was water degradation. That's one thing I thought should be on a list of required possible maintenance. Maybe if they don't do it annually, it should be done every 2 years or every 3 years, depending on the cost of it. And then the other things, I think we should be specific in a checklist of maintenance is what the Deckers and the subcommittee came up with in their reports are, replace the pump and motor when failure occurs. They have to produce well drillers' bill of charges and report. Add length of drop pipe to motor when pump and motor are replaced. They'd have to have receipts of the well driller's billing charges, total dissolved solids, lab chemistry report of the water, in the well every so many years, and then cammering the well when it fails. I think that would help with number 5, condensing that. They have a lot of stuff listed, in my opinion, in the shallow well mitigation report that the GA has right now. It would simplify it for the shallow well owner if you had a checklist like that. That's what I'm asking for, some kind of checklist to make it easy so they know what records to keep.
David?
Yes, sir.
Renee, there is virtually no domestic well owner that does virtually any of that. They have a maintenance schedule that's triggered by their pump and motor failing. They do not scrub. I'm not aware that any of the well drillers around here have a small bore scrubbing capability, even if they requested it. And the water quality aspect is controlled by the county. And anytime you make a major change, anytime a major change to your well occurs, you're supposed to get a general mineral water chemistry report. And that's about it. There is no requirement. Nobody even talks about doing what you're talking about that you pulled off the internet. I don't doubt that you found it, but it's not something that anybody follows. Now, those of us who are really interested in our well, have got a water meter and a running time meter and can easily calculate, for example, flow rates. We know what the gallons per minute, and you can see the pump deteriorating as time goes on from erosion. But that's something that is done, well, basically because I wanted to do it. It's not because anybody said this is what you've got to do.
I do some of that. I do some of that on my own. You watch your pressure tank. You watch how long it runs before it shuts off and how long it's off before it comes on again. That tells you the pressure in the pressure tank, or the condition of, and the pressure. And I got a meter. There's a meter on there that when the pump comes on and when it goes off, it tells me what the pounds are. I know what it is.
And again, as was stated in here, the only reason the GA would get involved with a well is because of the lowering of the groundwater level and a decrease in water quality.
Which we specifically said, I believe, in here that we weren't going to address because the water quality varies too much around the valley.
That's
and you
correct.
don't know, it's too unknown
And
for anything specific.
if you have your well pulled, your pump and motor pulled out of your well, you will get a well driller's report.
But it needs to be stated.
If not, you can certainly ask for one.
But my opinion, it needs like a checklist so they know what they're supposed to maintain over the years. And I think it would be easier. And then
They don't have to maintain
Section
anything.
5 on the mitigation program should be modified because, to me, this is more for larger wells, not shallow ones.
You're talking about on the form.
Right, their current form.
I agree with
that-
you, but again, we only addressed, as we did last month, de minimis wells because it covers over 90% of the wells that have been drilled in this valley. And that we say right here, Shallow wells that are not de minimis wells need their own policy, and it should be written. It should be written, but it should not be written by this policy advisory board because it's too complicated. There are legal issues. Again, there are legal issues as well as you aren't dealing with small, simple pumps and motors.
Okay, well, it says shallow well report form. Okay, we're just talking about.
We did not write the shallow well report form.
I know, I'm just saying where to modify it because that's where they came to us. Because on the agenda item number 5, it says recommendations for fair and reasonable expectations for documentation for the demonstration of well maintenance under the shallow well. What is reasonable to expect a shallow well owner who doesn't have $20,000 to $30,000 lying around to put all kinds of, mitigation if their well's not functioning correctly? What should they be doing on a regular basis? Because they're alluding to that you should have taken some of these other steps in number 5 on the report. And it's, I think this whole thing needs to be simplified so you don't have to have the whole thing done by the well driller. They should know what records they have to keep. And it's not that clear. And some of this applies to large production wells.
Renee, it does apply to larger wells. And the de minimis well, which, as Judy has emphasized over and over, comprises the great majority of the wells in the basin, do not follow those guidelines because they're unnecessary. When you pull your well when you actually have a problem, not when you think it has or when you, when you think it has. You do not pull your well at that point. Whereas what you're reading there is something that you guys yourself should have been following, not somebody with a de minimis well. That minimum checklist that you read off in the very beginning is $600 or $700. That's my guess.
So the point I've been trying to make is that I agree that checklist is complicated and unnecessary. I think we need to take it from the point of view of what does a GA require, and I'm repeating myself here. They need to know that the well has failed due to reasons that the GA is responsible for, and they need to know that the well was functioning when the GA took responsibility for that well, which was when the GSP was signed. And I think that's all that the GA needs to know. All the other things that I should be checking on my well that Lyle and Don do, and Don and Judy, I think that's highly recommended. It's beneficial, but it should not be mandatory for a well to be remediated. To be remediated, you need to know 2 things. It was functioning at the time that the GA took responsibility, and the failure was caused by the groundwater conditions we've outlined. And I think from a policy point of view, that would lead to a much simpler statement than what Renee has been reading back to us.
Do you think, Wes, that the subcommittee could craft that statement fairly easily?
I guess we'd have to see, and my thoughts would have to stand the scrutiny of the subcommittee because there's an awful lot of capability in that subcommittee. And so, but those are, from a policy point of view, that would be what I would bring to the table.
Because what I've heard so far is virtually unanimous agreement up here as to the information in this document. What I've heard the variations from that was specifically addressing, in my mind, what Wes just captured, parts of what Renee captured, and I've heard allusions to others about, getting a little bit more information for a well owner about what it means, what they should be expected to provide. And then there's a third issue that led to some of the perhaps perceptions of negative feedback when we presented this at the GA PAC report. was because it was limited to only the the de minimis well owners. And the policy and this was where a lot of discussion was clarified around, was the exact same issues that West had brought up at the last meeting and brought up at the Groundwater Authority meeting, which was the title of the policy is shallow well mitigation, and the definition, the understanding of definition generally across the state of shallow well is written that way because it's any well that has undesirable effects based on continuing overdraft. And in our case, in our valley, that's two reasons. One is declining water levels, and the second one is declining quality. And the subcommittee chose to focus where their expertise was and do a subset of that in the shallow, in the de minimis wells. And I think it's a very good report with that limitation, but it doesn't address those other areas that the Groundwater Authority is responsible for. And what the subcommittee has said tonight, again repeating what they said prior to that, is we don't feel qualified to comment on the greater than the shallow wells and all the complexities that entails. And I had a conversation where I said, well, as a minimum, what you come up with shallow wells, would that be a minimum expectation for any larger well or well system or not? And that may be as far as we feel qualified, and the policy committee as a whole feels qualified to answer.
I ask you this question, David. It says shallow domestic wells. What is a shallow domestic well? Is it a water district well drilled to 1,000 feet? What's an agricultural well? Is it a well that waters 2,000 acres of rice paddy? There is no definition of those things.
It says shallow water supply well negatively impacted by chronic overdrafting of groundwater in the basin.
That's what it says.
That's the title.
What does shallow mean?
Yes.
If it's 800 feet deep and it goes dry because of the continued overdraft, and this was clarified at the last GA meeting, it might well be, Mojave pistachios. It may very well be.
So we're going to pay for their new well too, right? Is that what I just heard you say? I heard you say that a little while ago, and
under Sigma, that's what Sigma says.
I thought it was domestic wells. I thought that it's de minimis.
I'm not going to speak for the attorneys, but I heard that, and I've heard it for 4 or 5 years.
I've heard it from our attorney.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, they've said it for 4 or 5 years.
Equal protection under the law. I know what he quotes.
And we, in our subcommittee, and we perhaps are best limiting ourselves to the discussion of de minimis wells, which we have the most expertise in.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well,
And so that, if we focus on that, then the only issue we have to answer is this clarification that West suggested.
I guess I'm not quite sure exactly, Mr. Katzenstein. You're just saying that all you need to do is have documentation on if the well was functioning prior to failure, and then have another documentation on why the well failed, and you're saying that's all you need to submit to the GA shallow well mitigation report if you're a domestic shallow well?
I'm kind of looking at the other side of the coin. I'm asking the question, what should the GA require to mitigate a well? The GA, in my mind, I take a pretty strong stand on the GA's responsibility to mitigate wells and to charge fees to mitigate those wells. Because if a lot of wells fail and the fees go up, that's going to help us resolve who should be using the water in this basin. But to go back to your question, I think from the Groundwater Authority's point of view, I think they need to know that the well was functioning when the Groundwater Authority took that responsibility that I just described, and they need to know that the failure mode was one that they've agreed to mitigate. And those are the two.
That's in here. That's in not the date, not the GSP date, but It's in here several places, that the well failure was caused by the lowering of the groundwater level.
I'm saying this document is a firm, rock-solid technical basis from which to derive the simple policy statements that we've been asked to provide. So I'm not challenging this document
Well, I mean,
at all.
You don't need
So,
to say it again, it's in here already. I hear what you're saying.
well, we would
But
derive
the one thing is already, the one thing
Right.
is already here,
right.
so we only need the one thing. Two things. We need the thing about the water quality John brought up, and
That needs to be there. Yeah.
we can add.
I'm just saying, from a policy point of view, we're poised now to provide the simple policy statements that we've been asked to provide.
I think we only
But
need
they're asking for reasonable expectations for documentation of what a shallow well owner needs to provide. I don't see that we're answering that question.
We've got 2 pages of concentrated technical information on that subject. I don't know why you wouldn't, I don't know how you would say what you just said.
Well, the question is, should the well owner be required to provide? That might be a very short list of documentation. It might be zero. There might be nothing on it.
One sentence.
It might be one sentence, yeah.
have no water.
So,
So do I hear a motion in that?
To do what?
That's what I asked. I have heard unanimous agreement that we like this document. The only discussion I've heard around is we want the clarity of an executive summary statement about what's necessary for the GA to ask of a de minimis well owner that's applying.
All
for
they
this
need
program.
is the well driller's report from the well failure, the guy that I would have to call to come look at it and say, yep, your goddamn pump is out of water. And that means, and you're in the perforations. I won't live that long for now.
And I think
But
they'd
but
be
anyhow,
thrilled to hear that.
and
The
that's
GA.
all he needs. That's all we need. One sentence. I'm back to your one sentence. When you said one sentence, you got it, because that's the sentence. You need the well driller's report for the failure of the well, and that's it.
Okay, but
Right,
the
nothing else?
agenda item says demonstration of well maintenance. Is failure, documentation of well failure, is that maintenance? I need to know.
And last time
And what documentation do you require for them to have, say, 10 years prior to their well failing? I mean, there's nothing spelled out.
This subcommittee and the committee agreed last time that the statement that well maintenance really doesn't play a factor in this. That was one of the positive statements, because that's what they said, that's exactly what we wanted to hear. You don't need to demonstrate any maintenance, but you do need to demonstrate perhaps what you just said. And I can't, you and West, I think we're in violent agreement.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, usually it's over chocolate, but
And so.
but there may be a little scotch.
And
never
so
mind.
there could be a motion that says, add that as a final recommendation in the report and clarifying what you all think it originally says, but it might not be clear to some well owners. And to the
I just
GA.
want to know, if I bought a plot of land in Inyakern and it had a well on it, and say it was 250 feet deep, that's a shallow well, I assume, for residential use.
It's a dry,
Then-
it's a dry shallow well.
So then, what documentation do I have to provide to the Groundwater Authority in this shallow well mitigation report? What receipts or reports or whatever, lab tests or whatever? You're saying you don't have to provide any of that? Just forget it, no records at all?
And this goes back to when council answered the question about we're not going to put together a list of everything because it covers the waterfront depending on what the conditions are, and especially if it's based on water quality. But what this committee has answered is the minimum required for a shallow domestic use de minimis well is the current well evaluation report. And it wasn't even the driller's report, because I got slapped down last time, because sometimes it isn't a driller that gives that report. It's the well evaluation report.
Okay, but if the well has failed, that's the well evaluation report?
That's the minimum required.
Whatever you want to call it, I don't know whether that's the correct, whatever what you get from the guy that pulls your pump out and says, yeah, this is what the problem is with your well, and it's caused by the water table going down, ever what you want to call that report. That's what it is.
And we, the Groundwater Authority, can ask them for any other supplemental data after review by Stetson, perhaps.
Right.
And you may even want to say, provide us all the data you have, because it may help you in your mitigation factors.
Where are you going to put that in this shallow well mitigation thing?
Well, remember, they've asked us, this was for they didn't ask us to change the policy. They asked us, what should we consider in our assessment? What's reasonable to expect from the owners? And we said, well, if we come up with something that's not in the policy, maybe we can recommend that be added to it or whatever.
I think
So this would be added again as an addendum.
I guess I'm still confused. I don't know what I would do if I owned a 250-foot well.
If you own a
What do I have to
250-foot well,
keep?
it's probably dry.
I understand
But
your question, Renee.
that's not a reasonable answer.
Yeah,
I mean, what if you just bought the property and water is coming out of it? And you have water. Well, I'm a new owner, what am I supposed to do?
You
Well,
might want to
there
have
are
somebody
records.
look at the well before you buy it, just to make sure that there's more than a little bit of water in that well. Because I know one down the road from me that I'm pretty sure, and I don't have any proof of that either, but
So-
I know the well.
Renee, what I hear him saying is if you bought that 250-foot well and it was functioning when you bought it, and it goes dry, the place you're going to start with the committee's, assuming the whole committee passes this, the committee's recommendation to the Groundwater Authority is it's reasonable to expect a well evaluation report current from you. And then that's a minimum starting place, and you would go from there. And that's why you don't want specifically listed everything you might need, because it depends on so many factors. But that's the bare minimum, is you've got to show something that indicates your well was at one time functioning. That gets back to West's points and the other points made by the subcommittee members. And then you've got to show, the current status of the well, and that's going to show if they're, why it is not functioning. And is that due to water level or declining quality? And you're going to need much more information potentially around the particulars of your well, your location, the hydrology, the pumping, in your vicinity, all those factors. And you could be asked to provide any additional data that you may have that can feed that. But obviously, the Groundwater Authority is going to have to do some research around that, and it's usually Stetson that we've referred to. But we can expect a well owner, a de minimis well owner in this valley, to at least have something that gets at, it was once a functioning well, and we have the current well report that says it's not.
And the only other thing that was brought up, John reminded us of, that if the water quality really went south, it would be nice to know that the water quality was not yet south when the GSP was signed. But that might be something that the GA could imply from looking at wells in the vicinity. But I think
that was my question a long time ago when we first took on this task, a question that I asked myself, and I never ask anybody. And that question is, to prove a water quality degradation, do I have to have a water quality degradation report on the water quality before the GSP?
So to answer your question, Renee, if you bought the new well.
That's not defined. That's not defined any place. So how do you prove it?
We have an opportunity to define it.
Yeah.
Or recommend it.
Yeah.
But I hear the committee did not want to do that.
It's there again. I think it's too difficult of a problem. Okay, this is enough of a problem, right? We don't need to add to it now. I would say. But that is something that is not answered any place that I saw.
Okay, so a new property owner that bought this piece of land, like myself, went out and bought a residential home that has a domestic shallow well, maybe around 250 feet deep, and it's pumping water when I first buy it, the property, and it seems functional. So am I obligated then to get a current well evaluation upon purchase? Because you're saying I have to prove that it was functioning when I bought the property.
Well, that,
I mean, what if I just bought the property and didn't bother getting a current evaluation? I trusted
I
the former
suggest you
owner.
sell the property and move back into where you could be a customer of the water district.
well,
No,
I
I'm
would
just
accept.
saying, you know, that then you're saying, what if I just owned the property for 5 or 10 years and then it suddenly failed and I didn't bother to get a well evaluation from when I first bought it, and then all of a sudden it fails, and so then
you
all I
go-
have to do is produce a document that says the well failed and have a well driller.
Correct.
That's all?
That's the first starting point. The GA needs something to go off of to begin with, and that's what they're trying to propose here.
Yeah, that
Is
report's
that's the
going to show
first
that
step
it was
to bring to the GA to show the condition of your well now. If the GA needs additional information, they can come back and ask for it. But they've got to have that report to start.
And-
That's where they need to start.
And in the case that Renee is proposing, if somebody bought a well that didn't work, but they're claiming now that it did, that evaluation report's going to show that.
The evaluation report is going to show that it once worked?
That it's been a long time since it hasn't worked. Is that correct? Likely.
I think the GA could determine at the time of failure with fairly high certainty that the well had functioned when the GSP was signed. And I might let Don, and suggest ask what Don's answer to that would be as well. But I think if you know the water level in the vicinity when the GSP was signed, you know the water quality in the vicinity, you probably can. Renee tells me that it was working when she bought it back then. I think put those together with with the groundwater authority evaluating the well at failure, I think you could probably deduce that it had functioned when the GSP was signed.
So there's no proof required that you had a change in water quality? No documentation, no lab tests done or anything like that is going to be required?
Not defined.
Yeah, the water quality issue is more difficult because the typical well owner has just a handful, maybe just 1 or 2 water quality reports over the entire life of the well. So if the well is producing poor water, they will, if they're concerned about it, they will have gotten some intermediate reports, but typically you don't have those reports either. You have 1 or 2. You have a report that was submitted to the county, water that was submitted to the county for analysis. Not that the county did it. You submitted a report to the county. And then years later, if you made a change of some sort, you're supposed to get another water quality report. And, that's about all the county requires. The one thing it's in your hypothetical 250-foot well in Inyokern, one thing that you may not be aware of is that there is a real estate well report for a property that has a well, and the well report consists of about 2 sentences. The well works is essentially what it says, or it doesn't work. It doesn't have anything to do with water levels or where the pump is sitting or anything like that. If you turn the tap on and water comes out, it's good. That's just for your information. You get that as a requirement for your real estate sale. So you can have a well that's sicker than sick that can pass that water comes out of the tap, and you're going to be severely disappointed over the next few months, maybe when you discover that Actually, it's pretty much of a trickle that came out.
Does the subcommittee think that they could draft a 1 or 2 sentence recommendation that captures the things we've just talked about in the last 30 minutes?
Yes.
I mean, and it's very focused.
Right, you have about 2 things, 3 things. The comment John made about water quality early on, and you want us to add the requirement that well owner has to have a current well driller's report.
At failure.
At failure.
Yes, at
Yeah.
failure.
And you want to consider what Wes talked about with regards to, if there is anything you can ask for, was it functioning at the time of the GSP?
Was January
Yeah,
2020.
right. So does the subcommittee think that they can do that?
Sure.
Yeah.
It would be
Okay,
extremely short.
so before somebody moves to do that, I'll take public comment. So from in the room, any public comment? Do we have any comment online? I'll wait a few more seconds. Okay, so do we have a motion to accept what the committee has put together and an additional statement or two, if it evolves to that, that we would ask the subcommittee to go develop around these discussion items that we just talked about?
I'll make a motion.
So do we have a second for Tim's
I'll second
motion?
it.
Any further discussion? Lord, no. That's why I'm trying to get closure on this. All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions or recusals?
I'll just abstain.
Okay, Renee abstained. All right, thank you. With that, that brings us to, I think it's member comments, closing member comments. I'll start at this end, John.
No comments for me?
I just want to make a brief comment on what Ron brought up at the whole beginning of the meeting. I think there is some bright light because I think that our C&E plan, the major recommendations that are being, Carol Thomas-Kiefer is pursuing them, most of them within her budget, and she's made it pretty clear she understands our recommendations. So I think, thank you, Carol, and I think at least in that instance, it's apparently turning into some action. Thanks to Carol.
Judy?
Well, I have 2 comments. The first comment is, when the camera's on you, West, your hair is really white. The second comment, of course, mine isn't, right? Don, I wish you all the best in your retirement and hope you and Carol have a wonderful new life up there in Minden. And tell her goodbye for me. And when it's over and you're up there, have a wonderful time.
Tim?
You'll miss it, Don. That's the only comment.
Don?
Well, Judy stole my announcement. I finally have an official retirement date of Friday, August 11th. So after extending for I don't know how many times, that's a solid date. So I want to thank everybody for all your work and putting all the work you put towards the subcommittee put towards this document. And I may be moving, but I'll still have interest, and wish everybody the best.
Renee?
I want to say goodbye to Don. You've done a lot of work for our valley. It's much appreciated. And thanks to the committee for all their work, the subcommittee. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, Don, I'd like to say thanks too, because have a good life up there. I'm familiar with the area somewhat, Minden. I got a real good friend that's in Gardnerville, so I'm familiar with that area a little bit. So anyhow, and also I'd like to recognize Ron, because he brought up some good things earlier today. And yes, we all recognize what you have said. We've recognized it for a long time about not doing this work, and we're volunteer labor too, So, but yeah, we recognize that, but we keep doing it anyhow. If we don't do it, who is? Right? So, but we appreciate it. Thanks.
Carol, I thought I'd offer you the opportunity, and I was starting that 2 meetings ago to comment during this portion, but once again, I forgot to start it with you. Do you have any comment to add?
Sure, thank you. Just briefly, with regard to the C&E plan, yes, I'm really excited about implementing your recommendations, and most of them we're working on that now, and we'll have some things definitely in the works, and available before the end of the year. So thank you again for all of your hard work in putting all of that together. And then as far as the information that you put together on the shallow well mitigation, you talked about how it was going to be used. I'm not sure. I can't say I like the idea of having, some of that information on the website as guidelines for well owners. And yeah, ultimately our legal counsels, they're the ones that tell us, how we can use things and what we can do. But I appreciate the work you've put together, the work you've done to put this together. I do like the idea of an addendum, something that folks have for reference when their wells go dry and they're looking for, if the GA can help them with mitigation. So I think this is really helpful. I'll tell you, when you put together a new program, a new policy, and then you have the first cases when you try to implement it, you find that there's so many areas that you didn't really contemplate in how you needed to address them. This is this is just an example of that. It's definitely had to deal with this and in other positions, other groundwater management scenarios, and this just comes up because it's new, right? And so it's something that we have to work through. And your assistance with this, especially those of you who have the personal experience as well owners, is really, really helpful. So don't think that we don't appreciate your hard work. We certainly do. Staff certainly does, absolutely. So again, thank you for all of your efforts here.
Thanks, Carol. And just a point of further clarification on that. We submitted the communications and engagement plan. There were actually 2 forms of it: the recommendations set first, and then the over 2 additional months reports, the actual formal communication and engagement plan. It was never accepted to file. It was accepted, and there were specific comments made by board members complimenting us and talking about the value in it, but not a lot was done with it until the point 3 meetings ago when I think Carol outlined some actions, and then at the last meeting she presented a budget for approval that they approved to move forward, and they accepted almost all of it. Some of the points that Ron brought up were not accepted, but the majority of it was accepted, and we did receive compliments on that. Don, can I clarify, you're going to be at the next GA meeting or not? Is this your last meeting associated with the Groundwater
Well, I haven't
Authority?
been physically here for it, but I've been online watching. Yeah, I'll be here for the next GA meeting on the 11th, I think it is, on the 9th.
So you're going to sit as an advisory member, or no? You have Chuck as a director.
Are you talking about PAC meeting?
No, I was asking. I was confused in my mind, but I was asking about the Groundwater Authority meeting. This is your last official duty for the Groundwater Authority, if you're not at that meeting, correct?
It's my last official duty representing the Water District on the Policy Advisory Committee meeting, if that's what you're asking.
That's what I was asking.
Yes.
And with that, I haven't been involved since the very start, but pretty darn close. And you've been a valuable contributor, and I want to thank you for that and wish you the best, you and Carol. And sorry to see you leave the Valley, but pleased to have you. You'll still have an interest, and send us some water down sometimes when you guys have a surplus snowfall.
Well, we're literally going to greener pastures. So.
Yeah, literally. I've been up there. If you haven't, Minden is surrounded by pastures and mountains on the other two sides.
Hey,
So
I bet this year the pasture is underwater.
yes. So thank you, Don. We've valued your input, and I understand your replacement will be at the next PAC meeting or not?
That's, the replacement is to start September 1st, so I'm not sure who will be representing the Water District at the next PAC meeting. But, the replacement.
We'll take it if you want to hang around.
I could call in. Thank
you, Don. Thanks very much. I also want to thank the committee. I think they came up with a good report, and the more we talked it through and all the light, I think that adds to it, and I want to thank them for their continuing efforts in putting together the final statement. So, and for their future event in this. So we will, unless absent any unforeseen circumstances, we will have a regular meeting next month to consider that final addendum or the final put to the report. And in the meanwhile, the report as submitted will be the foundation for that ad and the task. So thanks very much, everyone. Good night, and we're adjourned.